Good afternoon. Welcome to the Arkansas edition of our webinar series exploring state findings from American Farmland Trust's recently released Farms Under Threat 2040 Choosing an Abundant Future. Here's the agenda for our hour together. And before we get started, let me run through some quick logistics. Everyone has been muted, so no need to worry about your barking dog or other noises in the background. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so by going to the control panel on the right-hand side. You'll see an orange arrow at the top. That orange arrow allows you to shrink and open up that control panel. If you would like to ask a question or make a comment, you then see the question section of the control panel. On the right-hand side, there's a little box with an arrow. If you click on that box, it'll expand the question section. Write your question or comment in there, and we will get to them towards the end of the webinar. When we're going through the maps on the website, if that control panel is getting in your way, feel free to just click on that little arrow and it'll shrink the control panel. Also note on the control panel that there's something that says handouts. Again, if you click on that little box on the right-hand side, that'll pop that out. In there, you get to the full report and the Arkansas two-page summary, which gives you a lot of useful information about Arkansas. We will also talk about that when we get to the website. We are recording this webinar. We will send a link to the recording to everybody who is registered. Feel free to share that far and wide. We hope that the more people who see it, the better. So let me now introduce myself and my co-host. I am Chris Coffin. I direct the National Agricultural Land Network. That is an information and peer learning network that we established a couple of years ago for both practitioners in a professional setting and community organizers or interested folks who are working to save farm and ranch land. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. I also am Senior Policy Advisor for American Farmland Trust with a specialty of farmland protection, land access, and farm viability. Co-hosting with me is Billy Van Pelt. Billy is AFT's Director of Special Program Development and Senior Advisor. Billy is a licensed landscape architect. Billy has been working on land use and farmland protection for over 25 years. So before I turn it over to Billy, who will introduce our special guest, let me just take a minute to talk about American Farmland Trust. We are a national nonprofit membership organization founded in 1980. Some know us best by our bumper sticker, No Farms, No Food. The bumper sticker before this one said, it's not farmland without farmers. We understand agriculture and we take a holistic approach to it. Our national initiatives and regional programs focus not just on protecting the land base, but also on the practices used on that base and on the farmers and ranchers who work the land, both the ones doing that now and the ones who we want to be farming in the future. Our programs and our research inform our state and federal policy advocacy and analysis. We work from farm fields and kitchen tables to state capitals and the halls of Congress with 6 regional offices and a national office in Washington, D.C. And with that, let me turn it over to Billy to introduce our guest.
Thanks, Chris, and thank you all for joining us. We'd like to recognize and thank USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service for their partnership and financial support of our Farms Under Threat research. Farms Under Threat is AFT's multi-year initiative to document the status of and threats to America's agricultural land base. NRCS has been an invaluable partner in this entire research project, as has our research partner, Conservation Science Partners. For this particular report, we also collaborated with the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And now I'd like to introduce a very special guest. Secretary of the Arkansas Department of Agriculture, Wes Ward. Secretary Ward is from the small town of Lake City in northeast Arkansas. He is serving as only the third Secretary of Agriculture for Arkansas, appointed in 2015 by Governor Asa Hutchinson. He has served our country as a United States Marine for more than 20 years and currently serves in the Marine Corps Reserves as a civil affairs officer with the Force Headquarters Group in New Orleans. Secretary Ward holds a law degree, a Master of Laws degree in agriculture and food law, and a Master of Science in agricultural economics, all from the University of Arkansas. Thank you so much for joining us, Secretary Ward. You've had a chance to review the summary findings from the report, and I have 3 questions to ask you today. First, what struck you most about the findings?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say thank you to you and Chris for letting me join, and I appreciate y'all putting this report together, and it's interesting to talk about it. And I think the part that just struck me as just what kind of stood out the most was just the amount of land that's really kind of under threat. And so we talk a lot about economic prosperity and economic development, and bringing business opportunities to the state, whether agricultural or otherwise. That's a big part of what we do from a state government standpoint. Just growing our state and creating that good business environment. And so those things are good things, but you often left out of that conversation is the impact to our food systems and our agricultural production. And agriculture is our state's largest industry. And so we want business growth, we want more business opportunities across the state, but sometimes we forget to talk about how much land is involved as you see urban sprawl and these areas getting larger. And so really just trying to find a way to do both at the same time is really what I thought was really interesting about this report, on just different ways of looking at development and in particular certain areas of the state. Certainly Northwest Arkansas, we know has seen a lot of growth, and it kind of reemphasized the point that that's something we need to be thinking about in that area, and other areas where we're seeing this growth of making sure we're protecting our agricultural production and our farmers in that area to be able to be successful and sustainable into the future.
Thank you, Secretary Ward, and I'm glad you brought up economic development, and that agriculture and agribusiness is considered economic development. Where I come from here in Kentucky, we refer to our farmland as our factory floor for agriculture and agribusiness. So with that in mind, how do you think this research can be used by folks on this webinar to help save farmland?
Yeah, well, I think it's more than anything, I think it's educational. I think some people kind of see it when it's right next door to them, or see it when it's in close proximity, but maybe sometimes miss the bigger picture of here's what this means really across the state. And so for individual producers in different areas of the state that have a larger threat, it's knowing that they need to have conversations with their state legislators, and knowing that they need to talk to their mayors and their city council members and their county judges on, hey, here's what this means for me. I'm a business. I'm contributing to that tax base, and these things are good, but let's find ways to work together where one's not at the detriment of the other. So again, I think really more than anything, from my perspective, it's educational. It's giving individual producers, giving different parts of the state just tools of saying, here's what this means, and where it's not just someone saying, I don't like having this happening in my area. They've actually got some scientific, some fact-based research behind what they're saying when they're approaching elected officials and people of leadership.
Thank you, Secretary Ward. And then one last question. And your response was the perfect segue for this next question. What steps would you like to see state or local governments, or even the federal government, take to reduce the conversion of farmland?
Yeah, well, I certainly think, having a discussion is the first step. The educational piece, making sure people understand the dynamics of what's involved, educating them on what that looks like and what that means. But moving forward, I do think, whatever the solution may be, it needs to be voluntary. There needs to be some just incentive-based approaches that people can adopt. I think that certainly goes over a lot better than someone coming in and trying to force a particular model on someone. That certainly can be very disruptive and often not very well received. And so I think if you've got the education, you've got the research, you've got those things, it makes it easier to approach a voluntary incentive-based program to look at different options. And I know that there are different ways of looking at it, but how do you preserve farmland? How do you and two, how do you preserve that for future generations? And really a lot of that ties back to just the importance of agriculture. And we get it, and the people that are participating in this webinar get it, and they understand the importance of agriculture. They know where their food, fiber, fuel, and shelter come from, but a lot of people don't. And so making that connection with agriculture is national security, agriculture is food security. It's all these things that sometimes people take for granted. And if we want to have that, if we want to feed ourselves and feed the world, we've got to make sure that we're taking care of our farmland and our producers that are there. And again, having that as that educational piece where we can go and have those conversations makes it easier to preserve that farmland moving forward.
Thank you, Secretary. And we've certainly enjoyed you joining us here on the call today. And we hope you'll be able to stay for a bit. There may be an opportunity to provide additional comments towards the end of the call, but we also understand that you have a busy schedule. So I'll turn it back over to Chris. Chris, could you take it from here?
Yes, absolutely. And thank you, Billy. Thank you, Secretary Ward. That was great. And really, this is all about education and getting tools into the hands of folks who see a need for additional action and being able to provide, as you say, the education and the information needed to help make the case. So that's what we are doing today. We're now going to go off webcams so that we can show charts and the website in a bigger screen. So we are here. We're just not going to see us. We'll come back on at the end. And Secretary, if you do need to leave, we appreciate you being on. And thank you again for joining us. So, okay, let's now go into the findings and the methodology from the report. So the first two Farms Under Threat reports, Farms Under Threat, State of America's Farmland, which we released in 2018, and Farms Under Threat, State of the States, released in 2020, mapped past conversion of agricultural land, first from 1992 to 2012, and then from 2001 to 2016. In this report, we've taken a different tack. We're looking forward, using that past conversion data to model and predict future conversion of farm and ranch land out to 2040. We started with our Farms Under Threat State of the State analysis of that conversion from 2001 to 2016. And as a reminder, that analysis mapped conversion of land to two different types: urban and high density development, or what we've dubbed UHD, and low density residential development, or what we have called LDR. So let's talk about these for a minute. Urban and highly developed land is the traditional culprit in farmland conversion, and it's been mapped and tracked for many years. It includes residential, industrial, and commercial areas typically found in and around cities and towns. It also includes rural industrial sites such as oil and gas infrastructure and solar development, anything that can be identified by satellite remote sensing as built up. Low density residential development has become a more pervasive culprit, and AFT has worked with conservation science partners to pioneer an approach to map and quantify the impacts of this type of development on the land base. Low density residential areas range from very low density subdivisions to farmettes and ranchettes. Typically, this kind of scattered large lot housing fragments the agricultural land base and makes production harder for the farms and ranches that remain. It's important to note that some agriculture can be found in low-density residential areas, and smaller farm parcels, especially those near urban centers, can be quite profitable. However, our research has found that once land has been converted to low-density residential development, it is far more likely to be further converted to urban and highly developed land. So, starting with this historical data, we projected into the future with a business as usual scenario. Basically, this scenario is a straight line projection using the same annual conversion rate as we documented from the 2001 to 2016 timeframe to predict the level and location of conversion by 2040. We adjusted the model to account for projected population growth or population decline. Building off that scenario, we developed two alternative scenarios, which we'll get to in a minute. For each of the three scenarios, we also mapped the coastal flooding risk that is projected by sea level rise. Once we had the projections of conversion and flooding risk, we quantified the effects of these scenarios. We did this looking at the types of agricultural land that would be converted, so row crops, pasture land, rangeland, as well as on the quality of that land using our productivity, versatility, and resiliency index that we created in 2020. As with any modeling exercise, there are some caveats. Most importantly, we were not able to account for local zoning. Land use regulations are inherently local, and there is no national database of them. This means that our maps represent the general pattern and rough amount of conversion that is likely based on those conversion patterns from 2001 to 2016. They do not reflect what may be allowed or prohibited on the ground through local land use regulations. Our modeling also does not include the impact of water scarcity and potential fallowing of land because of water scarcity or salinization. Mapping this impact involves a complex interplay of many variables and was beyond the scope of our analysis. You'll see in the website, though, when we get there, that we did include a data overlay from World Resource Institute's Aqueduct, which offers some projections about water availability in the future. So here are the three scenarios we modeled. First, business as usual, as I mentioned. Again, that straight line projection out to 2040 from the 2001 to 2016 data. The second is what we call runaway sprawl. This envisions a scenario where sprawl actually gets worse, and this is possible by high housing costs in more urban areas and more remote work opportunities, which will only be improved as rural broadband expands. Some parts of the country may already be on this trajectory to runaway sprawl. Lastly, we modeled the future we hope for, what we called better built cities. This scenario envisions successful efforts to reduce the footprint of residential, commercial, and industrial development on the agricultural land base. While the scenario still results in the conversion of some agricultural land, it envisions a future with vibrant, compact cities and towns and abundant farm and ranch land to meet the needs of the future. So let's look quickly at the assumptions that went into these scenarios. For business as usual, again, this historical rate, we adjusted that historic rate for population change, since we know that population growth has a strong correlation with urban and highly developed land. We did not adjust the conversion rate for low density residential development, as there is not a similar correlation with it and population change. For runaway sprawl, this urban and highly developed land conversion rate remains the same as in business as usual, but we projected a 50%, for better built cities, we modeled a 25% reduction in the urban and highly developed conversion, and a 50% in the low density residential conversion. Research has shown that this increased level of density in urban development is possible for urban areas. We went with the more aggressive 50% reduction in the low density residential rate of conversion because this type of development is not occurring in population dense areas. We felt this represented an ambitious but achievable goal. So this next chart shows each scenario's potential impact. You see the gray area is actually the actual conversion from 2001 to 2016. We converted 11 million acres of agriculture in this country in this century alone. Under business as usual or worse, runaway sprawl, we may see another 18 to even 24 million acres of farm and ranch land converted or threatened by conversion. Conversely, if we make smart choices about where and how we site future development, we can reduce this conversion to 11 million acres. You may be thinking 11 million acres, that's still a lot. Is that really the best case scenario? AFT appreciates that development, including renewable energy development, is necessary, and the need for affordable housing options is acute. While it may be possible for cities and towns to be even more compact in their growth, we chose what we believed was a realistic scenario. So these next two slides we hope are helpful in showing how Arkansas compares to other states. This first slide shows projected total acres converted by county. The darker the red or rust, the more acres will be converted. So it's not surprising given the large size of agriculture out there in the far southwest. You see in Southern California, Arizona, Texas have some of the highest rates of total land conversion likely. This next one compares the percent of agriculture land in each county that is projected to be developed. And so you see a different pattern here with more of the eastern half of the country turning red. Another key finding relates to impacts on our very best agricultural land. For previous reports, AFT created the first ever index of agricultural land quality that looked at the productivity, versatility, and resilience of land, or PVR values. Land over a certain PVR threshold we considered to be nationally significant land, which is what this is a slide of. Land which we consider to be best suited for long-term cultivation and food production. While this land is concentrated in parts of the country, every state has nationally significant land, and you see quite a bit of it in Arkansas. What we find in our future projections is the conversion of this land is likely to be higher than conversion of most agricultural land, likely because for the same reasons that it's high quality agricultural land, it's relatively flat, it's well drained, it's relatively free of rocks, that makes it very easily developed. The loss of this land is especially concerning. This is land that can produce the highest yields of crops and livestock with the least environmental impacts. Our modeling shows that nearly half of the projected conversion from 2016 to 2040 will occur on this best land, even though it represents less than 40% of all of the land in the country. The more nationally significant land converted, the more reliant we become on marginal land for food production. And to put this potential loss of 9 million acres of nationally significant land in perspective, the total acreage of land in the U.S. devoted to fruit, nut, and vegetable production is just 10.4 million acres. So with that now, we are going to stop and dive into the interactive website. And as we're doing this, we will be ably assisted in our cruise through the website by our colleague and website navigator, Beth Fraser. So thank you, Beth. So here we are in the website, and Beth will, when she's not navigating, or maybe she already has, put a link to this website in the chat for the webinar. But you see this when you first get in here, you get to this very handy overview. What did we do? What did we find? What you can do. To get out of this, you go back to the top and you click on the little arrow right up there on the top right-hand side. If you ever want to get back to that, up in the top right-hand corner of the website, you see that About tab, and that'll get you back into it. While we're looking up at that far right-hand corner, you see a How To tab. That will take you to a 5-minute video that explains how to use the various data layers in the scenarios. Next to it, you see a View Report tab. That takes you to our Farmland Information Center, where Beth has just taken us now, where you can find the full report, executive summary, and lots of other additional technical papers and prior reports. We are making our geospatial data layers available to anybody who wants them. So if you would like them, the Request Data tab, which Beth has just taken us to, is the place to make that request and learn more about how to do it. So now we are going to zoom in and go to Arkansas. So when you're doing that, once you click on the state, it will automatically give you the state level information down below, as well as you see on the right here, Woodruff County, which just happened to be where Beth's cursor was when she clicked on Arkansas. So let's spend a minute here to scroll down and see what we can see. Again, here is the potential conversion of agricultural land on the various different scenarios. Business as usual is 480,400 acres. Again, you see runaway sprawl, which could be up to 663,000 acres. And business better built cities, obviously much smaller. Look here at the differences between the color. The color on the left is the very dark rust, which is urban and highly developed conversion. And the lighter orange is conversion to low density residential, so that you see in the state as a whole that most of the conversion that is likely is this low density residential development. It's a little bit different if you look over here now for Pulaski County, where those numbers are more urban and highly developed conversion, slightly higher than is the statewide average. Looking down, let's scroll down a little bit more to talk about what else you can find on this page, right? We look in terms of the state's best agricultural land. And again, that's what we mean when we've done our PVR index and looking at nationally significant and state significant agricultural land. Here you see that under business as usual, that it's 44% of the conversion is expected to be the higher quality land throughout the state. Runaway sprawl, 280,000 acres plus of that type of land. And you can see that again for every county, there's that same numbers available as well. Going further down, you see that in terms of the business as usual conversion of 480,000 acres, what is the projection of what kind of land is going to be converted? And our modeling shows 86,000 acres likely of cropland, the vast majority of conversion occurring on pasture land of 320,000 acres, with some woodland, 72,800 acres. And just a note about that woodland, that is woodland that is associated with a farm. It is derived from the 2017 Census of Agriculture. We came up with that way of spatially identifying woodland associated with farms and ranches. And so that is not all forest land, that is simply woodland associated with a farm. And if you look down here at the very bottom, when we say low density residential development paves the way for further development, in looking at the conversion rates in Arkansas, we see that once land is, our modeling shows, is that once land is converted to low density residential development, Again, while some of it might be in agriculture, it is 13 times more likely to be further converted into urban and high density development by 2040. So let's go back up. What we mentioned, that 2-page summary for the state can be found here in this blue tab, download report. Beth is going to click on that, and we just want to show you here. Again, this is a handy 2-pager that we hope that you will use and distribute widely. It really is intended for something that can be given to state and federal lawmakers, that can be given to county officials, that can be used in information with and education with members of folks' organizations, if there are organizations on this call today. And importantly, going back to what the Secretary said about the importance of economic development and agriculture being the #1 industry in the state, when we look at the trends and this possibility of nearly 500,000 acres being converted out of agriculture, we did some analysis of what this actually means in terms of the economics of agriculture and the potential impact that it would mean the loss of around 2,400 farms, $424 million in farm output, and 5,200 jobs in the agricultural sector. So it is not insignificant what kind of economic impact this loss of the agricultural land base could have on the state. The last thing we just want to point out, and Billy will look to it a little bit more, is the counties with the highest projected level of conversion, and those are Benton and White and Washington. We're going to come back to that in a minute, but let me just show you on the rest of this 2-pager. Again, this shows you the historic level of conversion, and again, the acres of projected conversion. And the development choices matter in the green here, that if we work hard to minimize the impact of development on the agricultural land base, what kind of acres we could save and how much less of an economic impact it would have on the state. And so with that, let me stop, and I'm going to turn it back to Billy, and with Beth's help, he is going to zoom in on some counties and talk about what we're seeing.
Thanks, Chris. And we're going to focus on Northwest Arkansas. We're going to be focusing on Benton and Washington counties. And why don't we start with Benton County? So as you see, I want to explain all the different colors that you're seeing here. Again, our green is our most productive, versatile, and resilient land. Our dark gray are urbanized areas, and our darker gray, Beth, if you could bring up the legend again for our folks, the lighter gray that you can see is existing low density. But then if we look at projected urban and highly developed land and projected low density residential for Benton County, for example, if we could turn those on, we'll select runaway sprawl on the left, and we will select better built scenarios on the right. So you can see from very clearly, based on the red and the orange, the better built scenarios is more of a compact, contiguous development model. And this is the model where you are expanding, for the most part, existing urbanized areas rather than sprawling out. And this type of development model definitely has a fiscal impact. And as we look at growth, I think we always look at the fiscal impacts on the budgets in counties across the nation. So growing in a compact, contiguous manner allows county governments to grow in a way that is sustainable for their budgets. American Farmland Trust has done over 80 cost of community services studies across the nation, and they all generally say the same thing. Sprawl uses more in services than it pays in taxes, and ag uses less in services than it pays in taxes. So, Beth, if we could now go down and take a look at the next county directly to the south. And we can see a similar development scenario there in Washington County. And I think it's important to note here, particularly in Washington County, that with runaway sprawl, you are using 33,000 acres of land and half of that using better built cities. And so I think that's a critical point here, is that it's not a no growth scenario by any stretch. American Farmland Trust has always been about smart growth. We're a nonpartisan, middle of the road organization. So having the opportunity to grow in a smart manner, putting development so that it doesn't take all of our best lands, is our recommendation here with better built cities. And so, Beth, I think that's all we have to cover at this point, and I'd like to turn things back over to Chris.
Great, thank you so much, Billy. Now that we've talked about the findings, we want to take a few minutes to talk about action. What can each of us do to help choose an abundant future? Our report has policy recommendations in each of these 4 categories and at every level of government. If you are a county or municipal official, a state legislator, a state agency employee, or a congressional staffer, we hope you'll find a recommendation in here that you'd like to champion. Please let us know if we can provide you with any additional information about any of the policy ideas in this report or any other policy ideas as well. If you are a farmer, a rancher, a landowner, or a community advocate, we encourage you to share and discuss these recommendations with your elected and agency representatives and partners. Let me just highlight a few of the things that we discuss in the recommendations. So under encouraging smart growth, we tend to think of smart growth in terms of large cities, not small towns. But to avoid sprawl, rural communities must also find ways to promote compact development. One way to do this is by allowing accessory dwelling units in a town's residential areas. Accessory units are typically small apartments within an existing home or attached to it, such as over a garage. This type of housing can allow for seniors to age in place, expand rental options for younger residents, and provide homeowners with extra rental income without altering the character of a small town. It is surprising, though, how few small towns actually proactively allow for accessory units. Protecting agricultural land. Congress will be writing a new farm bill next year. An important program in that bill is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, which is one of those incentive voluntary programs that Secretary Ward talked about at the beginning. It helps to fund the purchase of agricultural conservation easements from willing farmers and ranchers who want an alternative to development and a way to tap into some of the equity in their land. More funding for that program would enable more landowners who choose to do so to protect their farmland. Advance smart solar siting. That's a mouthful. Local governments can ensure that best practices are followed when siting solar on farmland. This includes best practices for the construction of solar projects, the operation of them, and the decommissioning, all so that the development can preserve soil health can preserve water resources, and ensure that farmers retain the ability to farm their land during and after the life of the project. States can also invest in additional research around agrivoltaics or dual-use solar and provide incentives for dual-use solar development. And lastly, supporting farmland access. State and local governments can develop their own or help fund nonprofit farm link programs, or even those types of programs that some cooperative extension services run. Programs that work with both farmers and landowners who are looking for a successor or wanting to think about their succession plans, or working with folks who are looking for land to lease or buy. Especially needed to make these kinds of connections between farm seekers and landowners and retiring farmers is individualized technical assistance to help match landowners and farm seekers. Northwest Arkansas Land Trust operates a great Farm Link program. You can learn more about it at nwafarmlink.org. And with that, Billy, I'm going to turn it back to you to talk a little bit about best practices and smart growth.
Thanks, Chris. And Chris, you made some very good points there, especially with the ACEP program. Community planning is critically important to smart growth. And as part of this planning, AFT encourages communities to plan proactively for agriculture. And these involve these 4 principles that you see here. These are principles that can work in tandem with efforts to plan for smarter, more compact development. Many resources on planning for agriculture can be found on our Farmland Information Center website, which we'll share later in the presentation, and we hope you'll check it out. Chris, you were talking about ACEP. Those are federal matching dollars, and those dollars are providing a one-to-one return on investment to either the state or county government investing in farmland protection. So if a county or a state puts in $1, they're going to get $1 back. So leveraging those local tax dollars for 100% return on investment for the taxpayer is critically important. But each of these points, inventorying resources across the county, agricultural resources, soils, blue line streams, aquifers, scenic view sheds, cultural and historic resources are critically important because these all go together in the rural area. Engaging farmers and ranchers in comprehensive planning processes or community meetings, and asking them what their concerns are and getting them directly involved. And then incorporating agriculture into community plans. This could be with a agriculture or conservation element as part of a comprehensive plan, or if it's a community that doesn't have planning and zoning, adopting a plan that looks at the rural area holistically and provides guidance in the years to come for how to manage that rural landscape. And then implementing tools to retain and protect agricultural land. These are also incredibly important. And Beth, if you could go to the next slide. These are national best practices. This is not a prescriptive list. These are just some best practices. Urban growth boundaries that define urban areas from rural areas, and quite frankly, define areas where services are provided. So you're putting all of those urban services, infrastructure, water, sanitary sewer, stormwater, roads, streets, curbs, gutters, sidewalks in an urban area, reducing the cost to the taxpayer. Agricultural zoning, this promotes agribusiness and agritourism and agricultural uses of land. large minimum lot sizes in rural areas. This will help get away from the low density residential phenomenon that we see in rural landscapes, where we have the farmettes that Chris was talking about earlier in the presentation, or as we say where I'm from, too much to mow and not enough to grow. Farmland protection programs, PACE programs, Purchase of Agricultural Conservation Easement Program, or PDR, Purchase of Development Rights Programs, at the state or local level can be very effective. And then land trusts, partnerships with local land trusts. Land trusts historically have only accepted donated conservation easements, but now have the ability, using federal matching dollars, to purchase easements as well. So I think that weaving all of these together will provide the greatest result and the greatest impact. And then having a goal for permanent farmland protection at the county level. I think it's taking a smart growth perspective. You know that you're not going to protect every square inch, but you want to protect your best farmland. And then what is that? What is that number? How many acres will it take to retain the agricultural, agribusiness, and agritourism industries in your county or in your state? So I think we have time now for a few questions. Chris, do we have questions from the audience?
Thanks. We have one, Billy, but I encourage folks, we do have a couple of minutes, so if people do have questions, please feel free to type them in right now. And why don't we, before we close out, turn on our cameras again so we can see each other. I don't know if the secretary is still with us. He looks like he had to leave, so we were very grateful that he joined us. So, Billy, the one question that we have is about dual use solar. It was, tell us a little bit more about dual use. How effective is it, and what is AFT's thinking about it in the future?
So I think it would be important for me to start with AFT solar siting priorities generally. Let me add that these priorities are available on our Farmland Information Center website, but you can see the address in the slide. If you go there and type in solar, there are numerous links, but there's one in particular that is a guiding tool on how to implement smart solar siting at the local or the state level. Generally, AFT's smart solar siting priorities are first and foremost on brownfields and sites that are not used for agriculture. Then to rooftops or urban areas, and then to marginal soils if it does have to be in rural areas. Those are our priorities. We know that there is going to be traditional solar, as we say, large-scale arrays. There will also be dual use. So when we talk about dual use, we're talking about solar that's done in such a way that you have agriculture during the term of the solar on the land. And, whether if that's a 25-year lease or whatever it may be, it allows for agricultural activities to happen under those solar panels or integrated with those solar panels. So we do support dual use solar, or otherwise known as agrivoltaics. There are several links on how dual use is being implemented in other states across the nation. There's some case studies there, particular to the Southeast in Kentucky, that you can be accessed there. So dual use is one type of solar that AFT supports, but again, knowing that there are going to be other types of solar. And one example might be that if you had a farm where 2/3 of the farm was prime farmland soils and 1/3 of the farm were marginal soils, just very generally speaking, our priorities would be that solar is located on the marginal soils and not on the prime farmland soils. And I think there is some latitude here if it's not traditional solar and it's dual use. But that's just a very general overview. Again, more resources available on our website.
Great. Thank you, Billy. We have one more question, and that is, have you implemented any regenerative ag-focused easements in Arkansas? And I have thoughts on that, but if you would like to take the first stab at it, you go ahead.
I'm going to speak at the national level, Chris, and then I'll defer to you as our Senior Policy Director. At the national level, American Farmland Trust has an entire national initiative and national team that is completely focused on regenerative agriculture, on soil health, water quality, carbon sequestration, and it just is the way forward with agriculture, because it's not just enough to protect acres of land, it's about protecting inches of soil. And so I think anytime there's an opportunity to embrace regenerative agriculture holistically across agriculture, across the nation, across states, or across counties, American Farmland Trust has the policies and the initiatives to use as examples or best practices, and staff that can help on a case-by-case basis. And then I'll turn it over to you, Chris.
Great, thank you. I was hoping you would paint that picture, and then it would allow me to talk about a particular project that we're working on that I'm very excited about. When we are doing easements, one of the challenges with easements is that the way of valuing an easement is based on its alternative to development. And so it's hard to also, if you're thinking about an easement that is also, well, let me say it in a different way, that we believe that easements that are a sort of durability tool, thinking about keeping development off of our best land. As Billy said, we like to encourage and are very focused on trying to encourage regenerative agriculture. And a project that we're working on now with the Land Trust, not in Arkansas, but we would love to see this expanded, is what we call stacked conservation. That is an easement and then an additional contract on top of that easement that encourages and pays for a landowner to adopt additional regenerative focused farming practices. And we feel that this twin approach of having an easement and an additional contract that is different from the easement is one of the ways to go, because again, those easements are really focused on perpetual durability tools, and the focusing on the practices is something that we think is often better in a different type of instrument, not in an easement. So we're very excited about that. If anybody would like more information about that, we would be happy to talk further. So with that, that's the questions, Billy. So I think, let me just talk for a minute about a couple of resources that you see on your screen here. The Farmland Information Center is a cooperative project that we have with USDA's Natural Resource Conservation Service. It is an information hotline. You see that telephone number there, and an entire website that is devoted to agricultural land. And it both provides resources for farmers, ranchers, and landowners, those who are interested in finding a land trust to work with, or might want to know more about soil health or about what is an agricultural conservation easement. Those kinds of things can be found on the Farmland Information Center, as well as for those who are engaging in policy work. We have a huge amount of resources and studies that help to make the case for saving farmland, back to a lot of the cost of community services, studies that Billy mentioned, and state laws, and a lot of statistics around the Census of Agriculture and a number of other federal surveys. So if you have a question, if you're just looking for a statistic about Arkansas farmland or Arkansas agriculture, feel free to reach out to the Farmland Information Center. They are there, they answer the phone, and they're a wealth of information. The National Agricultural Land Network, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a couple of years old. We recognized in 2020, after our Farms Under Threat State of the States report, that we needed to help folks to network with other folks around the country so that we can all learn from each other on what are the best ways, what are the multiple different ways that we can be saving farmland, from those types of planning practices that Billy was talking about, to soil health, to thinking about other ways of protecting farmland that might be less than permanent protection. That's the goal of this network, and we hope that you will join. It is free. More information about that can be found in the chat as well. So, and feel free to reach out to me. So with that, Billy, let me turn it back to you to close us out.
Thanks, Chris, and I want to thank everyone that's joined us on the webinar today. We hope that you have learned something, and we hope that you will continue to engage with American Farmland Trust on this important research. And let me just remind everyone, in addition to the website for the National Ag Land Networks shown on your screen and the Farmland Information Center, that there are 2 additional resources. Our primary website is farmland.org for our organization, and the website for Farms Under Threat is farmland.org/Farms Under Threat. We encourage you to get involved in this conversation at the local level. This is county level data. So we have some pilot projects in the Southeast, and we'd be interested in starting other pilot projects with county level data to advance farmland protection in Arkansas. If there are opportunities, please reach out to me or to Chris. And I'll also say that there's an opportunity to engage yourself by getting yourself appointed to a local planning commission, or getting yourself on a board of adjustment, or perhaps running for local office. These are things that we suggest for people to get directly involved in these conversations to help plan for the future of agriculture. Because as we say at AFT, no farms, no food. Thank you for joining us.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your afternoon.